righty, for yet another appearance on Speaking of Data. Happy to welcome back once again David Stodder to discuss data democratization today. How are you doing today, Dave?
Good, Andrew. How you doing?
Doing good, doing good. We got the 4th of July week coming up here pretty soon. I know everyone's really starting to feel the effects of summertime. At least we are here in California, which is nice. The sun's out. So
Sweet.
yeah, I'm excited to to have this conversation with you, though. And I know that we just did a webinar on data democratization. I think it's a topic that seems to be pretty relevant right now. So I'm excited to get your thoughts on that. So I'm going to jump right in here, Dave. So as I mentioned, we're seeing data democratization be a topic that's seeming to be brought up quite a bit in conversation. What is data democratization, and is there a trend that's driving this like movement towards having data democratization in organizations?
Well, I mean, I hadn't thought about it, but I guess the timing is pretty good for Independence Day, because democratization. I mean, hey, um, so yeah, but in a way, I think it's kind of lined up with that the idea of empowering people, giving them the tools and the data and the information to feel that they can be influential, they can make a good decision about something, whether it be just the decision that they're making today about a business process or something like that, or participating in developing a much broader strategy in innovating for their organization, extending into analytics, the idea of questioning kind of assumptions that have been around for a while, and being able to lend their insights based on data that way. So I think, some of the things that we see in our research, the ambitions that organizations have, they want to improve operational efficiency and effectiveness. So there again, the daily decisions. But then, of course, we get more into innovation around that as well, looking for ways to reduce costs where there might be bottlenecks that are either increasing costs or slowing things down. So they want to empower users, be able to provide the right kind of data. It might be through performance metrics, lots of things that have been around traditionally, but that's changing as well as more things are becoming available. Customer-centric innovation, being able to interact and engage, be responsive to what customers are doing as another driver, using data to, thinking about that in a way to improve business relationships. So you have supply chain partners, or maybe if you work for a healthcare firm, there's a network of doctors, maybe something like that. And so you want to be able to use data, be able to communicate in that way to influence what's going on for the patient, for example, and then risk management, resilience, things like that. And so a lot of things come into it, like the speed to insight. So because if if the information is late or is too historical, or not relevant anymore, that's a problem. So you want to make sure that that matches up well with the kind of decisions that people are making, faster decisions in those operational processes. If there's a lot of bottlenecks that are kind of hanging things up, that's a problem. Improving ease of use, I know, that's of course central to it, and modernizing technologies to overcome the kind of legacy limitations. Always be kind of looking at what users are working with now. It might be spreadsheets, that's common, pretty common, or other kinds of limited sort of reporting tools that are part of applications that may not be enough, that kind of legacy technology. And so they need something that's more appropriate for their kinds of decision making. So I think that probably hits most of the things that we think of at TWI when we talk about that, for empowering users through data democratization.
Yeah, I mean, it makes all the sense in the world to have all the people that need to be working with the data have access, and then expand that out to make that process of whatever they're trying to get done easier to handle, and potentially have more people being able to handle it, right? I mean, that's essentially what we're looking at, right?
Yeah, it's always easier said than done. I mean, and I think that, in an older era, they didn't use the term data democratization, but wanted to spread out business intelligence to more types of users. But that was kind of more of a top-down process coming from, you've got your analysts and more technical people who can work with the data, and really very slow process of trying to enable more users, power users, to have that technical capability to write SQL queries, to do data modeling, to do things that are necessary to really work with the data. But now it's almost more bottoms up because you've got people coming into your organization who are, younger and are a little more used to using data. They may have apps, today on their phone that essentially they're kind of working with data. And so they have a different set of expectations. So organizations are now under pressure. And I think that's part of what's also behind data democratization is that, you've got people coming in now to firms who are ready to go. I mean, they want to use data, but where's the data? So give me good tools.
Right.
So more pressure that way.
Yeah, well, I think that kind of blends in nicely with the next question I'm going to be asking you here, which is about the self-service tools and technologies, right? How are trends in self-service impacting data democratization?
Yeah, well, I mean, the last survey we did, and I'm actually just at the finishing stages of our next best practice report I'm going to write. So 73% of the data democratization and self-service functionality are either extremely or very important. So it's definitely a high priority in most organizations of all sizes, really, not just large organizations, but small to medium-sized organizations as well. And self-service has been a huge driver. It's been going on for a long time. As I mentioned, the BI tools and some of the most important innovative tools that have come out in the last, say, 10 years or so around BI have improved ease of use, more intuitive interfaces, more drag and drop, the being able to kind of compose your screen, choose the data sets that you want. And that's kind of pushing on to now we're seeing AI infused recommendations. So it's not just giving the user a blank slate, but depending on their roles, responsibilities, maybe a level of experience, to be able to use AI. And of course, AI is kind of being active and watching what the user is doing, looking at patterns and what kind of data they're looking at, what kind of analysis they're doing, what sort of visualizations they're using, and providing recommendations there for that. And so that's starting to, it's really been appearing in tools for the last few years. Natural language interfaces or natural language search. And now we're going to see large language models coming into that. And we're already seeing most of the prominent analytics and visual analytics and BI tool vendors start to bring in large language model capability. And so that's obviously the topic of the day. I mean, it's a huge topic this year. So we're starting to see that. So natural language search kind of merging into that. Using things like knowledge graphs to understand data relationships. So not just depending on SQL queries and querying the data, but using a little more different styles of looking at the data and even recording these data relationships in graph databases, things like that. So that's starting to kind of become part of it so that, again, users are not having to just start from scratch to understand data relationships. And this gets important as you look at lots of diverse data sources. And then, all the tools are providing things like predefined or capabilities for predefined data sets, predefined visualizations, other kind of functionality that can be kind of set in place again, so the user's not working with a blank slate, and then being able to automate behind that. So if it's predefined, say, data sets or things like that, or data transformations, for thinking about data preparation, that can be automated. So it just can go a lot faster and not bury the user. And that's the problem, really, if you have self-service, you're trying to take kind of IT out of the picture. Well, that means a lot more burden potentially on the user to do things like data preparation and data quality and cleansing the data. I mean, those processes obviously can take a long time and can be incredibly complicated as the data gets bigger. So you want users to be productive with the data. And then you want them to be able to trust the data. You want them to be able to trust that the data is accurate, has good quality, that is relevant, all those kinds of things. So those are all sort of part of that whole data curation cycle and data preparation cycle that's so important and brings in a lot of different other kinds of tools, particularly, around data catalogs, metadata catalogs, and things like that to speed up being able to find the data and knowing its quality, knowing its lineage, things like that. So it's not just the front end tool anymore, really, for self-service.
Right. Dave, this brings up a question in my mind where we've done podcasts on data literacy in the past, but when you're talking about data democratization, is in your view, like, do organizations need to be more widely data literate in order to really start moving towards a more democratized data situation there? Or is there a tool that can help them get up to speed, faster without having to go through some sort of learning process?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think you're right, that data literacy is really important, because if you just give the users the tools and say good luck and
Yeah.
walk away, that may not go so well. And so I think there has been an emphasis in organizations, and at TWI, we've had a lot of training sessions at our conferences and on site and things like that to try to help organizations understand where they are right now, which is important. So you want to know
Mhm.
what users' capabilities are now and where they're running into stumbling blocks, where they're having difficulty. And again, if you think about democratization, it's a spectrum of users. I mean, so because you could have, again, people who are power users, pretty data savvy, but then you're also having people who are just really consuming the data. They want to look at a dashboard, they want to look at a visualization and make a quick understanding of what's going on so they can make a decision. And so you need to make sure those people are very literate, at least in what they're looking at. They
Mm.
understand the importance of it, what impact it has on their business process or their decision making. So literacy, in other words, is not just one thing. It's got to be kind of tailored to what the user is all about. And so I think that's a really good question. I think a lot of it is training, taking time to do it. So not speeding ahead by just dropping the tools in their lap, that kind of thing. So it's in terms of tools for it, I think, yeah, a lot of the BI and visual analytics tools have used a concept around data storytelling, for example. So
Mm.
trying to build in a little bit more of a process around both how to arrive at a conclusion based on the data and then how to communicate that. Because that's a big part of it too. Literacy too is being able to communicate what you're seeing in the data, so that others understand and you can share it. You can share the results of analytics and so forth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So kind of compounding on to the idea that many people want to be using this data, I have to ask about, data governance in this sense. I'm assuming, the more people that you grant access to data, the more possibility it is for, them to misuse it or accidentally corrupt it, or, whatever the case may be. So I think there's a chance that many organizations have been hesitant about expanding self-service capabilities due to that concern about data governance. Are you still seeing that as being an issue?
Yeah, for sure. I think, and I think a lot of organizations are. That's the key thing is like, well, what are we going to do about data governance? We can't expand faster than we can govern the data. And organizations, of course, are already facing a lot of strains around data governance anyway, because again, the spectrum of users, you might have data scientists doing analytics or citizen data scientists who are not, completely expert data scientists, but are again, those sort of data savvy users who are moving into predictive modeling and maybe even launching machine learning algorithms. And now we've got large language models, so maybe exploring that possibility as well. And so if you don't have the rules and policies in place to make sure that users are handling the data correctly and sharing it, and particularly if it's anything having to do with people, essentially, whether it's customers, patients, fellow employees, anything that having to do with people that could be personally identifiable information and things like that. Data privacy is a major concern, and you have to be thinking about certainly the regulations that are in place in your state or GDPR or something like that. So that all needs to be there. And so that's what we would consider the sort of defensive data governance, to protect the data and make sure use of the data and sharing the data is aligned with regulations, rules, policies. But there's also the offensive side, which at least in the industry, people call it offensive, which is around data quality, data, whether you can trust the data, whether it's complete, accurate, things like that. And so that's an important kind of part of data governance as well, as just to build up the trust in the data. Data lineage is something that's really important to both of those. So that's understanding the origin of the data, what's happened with the data in terms of including transformations, things that have done to change the data, enrich the data, cleansing the data. So you can understand what those processes were and what they did to the data. And so there's tools that are coming out. And I mentioned data catalogs earlier. And there was also data lineage tools for protecting the data, access control tools, things like that sort of lend into the data security realm. So all of that is important to sort of tooling, but I think ultimately it comes down to getting people together, making sure all the users understand it, the data owners, developing data stewardship so you can kind of guide and mentor users, have people in place in your groups and the departments and functions who understand all those rules and can make sure that everyone else understands them and can be complying with them. So I think it's sort of process, people, and then I think technology is coming along to improve data governance as well.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like, people want access to view all the relevant data, as you've mentioned before, and when they're trying to make those decisions and investigate, business performance metrics or, explore data for new insights. I'm curious if data distribution would make that more challenging, like having it more widely distributed.
Yeah, it does. Because I mean, a lot of people, we talk about data democratization. They might be thinking immediately, oh, more data silos. Great. This is
You're
just
right.
blow our minds here. This is going to be great. Um, because already data silos are a big problem in organizations. And in some ways, the cloud, I think we've talked about in past podcasts, has really kind of accelerated that it's so easy to put up a data system now. So yeah, governance or governing all the distributed data is a major issue. And then looking again at that offensive side, providing access, trusted access, making sure it's good quality data that is relevant data. I mean, all those things can really bog down users. So as I mentioned before, you want to get to faster decisions and reducing the bottlenecks that are in the way of users being able to have, the currency of the data that they need. Well, all of that can just, make it really gum up the works and make it hard to do anything. So yeah, I think again, behind the scenes, and we're going to have a lot of coverage in TWI coming up around things like data fabric and data mesh to try to understand or to try to put together a better architecture, a better way of understanding how to manage the distributed landscape. And of course, those are two topics we could talk about for an hour each at least. Yeah, because they're complicated, but the fabric idea, that's sort of a good word for it. They're trying to create a way you can govern, kind of orchestrate data processes, particularly data pipelines, to enable all kinds of access, whether it be reporting or analytics or visualization. And the data mesh, I think we're seeing it more of as a practice idea, really, that's very important for making sure that those domains, the independent domains who are producing data, like the data as a product idea, have everything they need to be able to do that and aren't really held back either by too much sort of centralized control of what they're trying to do, which can bog things down, but also making sure they have enough, particularly around governance, to have trust in the data, to be sure that they're complying with any kind of policies and rules and things like that. So it's sort of a work in progress, I think, for everything, just trying to balance it out to make sure that the processes of move forward at a good pace can be accelerated, can scale, but at the same time adhering to whatever principles are necessary depending on the organization.
Yeah, a quick question before I have one more question for you, but this one just popped in my head. Uh, I'm not sure necessarily if you've seen this or not, but is there, in your view, a higher success rate with data democratization based on the type of structural model that organizations are in, whether that be like centralized, decentralized, or like some sort of hub and spoke? Do you see there being any correlation to success in those particular models?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that a lot of organizations are trying to consolidate, and so maybe have more of the hub and spoke kind of idea to create a formalization around it. And I think that has been successful in a lot of organizations to do that. It's just getting to that hub and spoke can be quite a process. And so I think organizations are looking, and particularly at things like a data mesh or data fabric. Can we take a different direction with this that might get us there faster, maybe while they're in the process of consolidating into more of a hub and spoke idea. Of course, hub and spoke in a way is sort of a distributed architecture in itself. But so yeah, I think that there's a variety of successes and challenges and pitfalls with each one of them. Because you want to, I think it's probably look at the business problem you're trying to solve is always a good idea. Sort of start small and grow from there. sort of solve a problem that you have instead of trying to, as they say, boil the ocean. But then have a strategy in place, definitely a data strategy in place that takes a big picture and sees how these things that you're trying to do fit into a longer term strategy that may take quite a long time to kind of fully realize itself. But you want to have value along the way. So
Yeah.
be a good balance.
Okay. We're still pretty early, I feel like, in this kind of movement to data democratization. So maybe sometime down the line, we'll have like more concrete evidence as to whether or not one of those models makes sense for you to start, the shift, and then maybe move from there into the democratization side of things. But
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I think you're right. I think, and not to keep hyping the research I'm about to produce, but that's actually some questions I've got in the survey
Oh, fun.
specifically around that. So I think it should be interesting to see.
Great. Okay, cool. Okay, Dave, I want to get you out of here. So if you can, maybe summarize the key points that you see organizations taking or making a strategy for successful data democratization.
Sure. Well, I think we've talked about self-service tooling and how that's advancing, and that's very exciting stuff. And I think we're going to, in a way, it's been sort of a quieter time for that kind of technology. But I think with large language models and more AI in those kind of tools, it's going to be interesting to watch how that changes going forward, because I think we're maybe on the beginning of a new cycle of a lot of innovation in that area. So that's certainly an area to watch, but that's only as successful as the data itself. And so the data architecture kind of issues we've been talking about, and I think you raised a great question there, and just thinking about how to handle distributed architectures to really expand data democratization and sustain it and scale it. Those are critical issues, and how you're going to curate the data for all the kinds of different users, how much of users are going to do that in a self-service fashion, because they'll have their own ideas about what they want to do. They're often closer to the data itself. So you have to come up to a right balance there. And I think the other things we've talked about, data literacy. So culture is really important to try to build in a culture of that includes training, that includes data literacy, and includes acceptance of, you've got users who are going to come to the fore with it. They've been looking at the data, they have a new idea, like, hey, this is how we can fix this process. This is what I'm discovering in the data. And so there has to be sort of an acceptance of, not acceptance of necessarily of that plan, but at least acceptance of, let's talk about this, let's look at the data and think about it. And so organizations need to democratize that as well. So it's not just all top-down decision making. So that's important. And then I mentioned data stewardship. So you want to have data stewards who can be from IT, but they could be from the business users themselves, but they're people who understand the data, understand the governance rules, understand what quality really means, particularly, for this particular purpose. And so to be able to just have a good knowledge of the data and be able to communicate that to everyone. So those are all the culture training issues. And then we talked about having a data strategy. So again, having that kind of big picture strategy, but then not just only develop that, but have ways you can have value produced every day, to be able to make an advance every day to help users, to reduce the bottlenecks, to get them closer to where they're really using data effectively. And being, of course, trying to unify those two things, not having them out of sync, is very important. So you got to look at data flow problems, where there are obstructions, where there are bottlenecks, where could things be more timely? How can you improve confidence and trust in the data, depending on its use case, and make sure it's fit for purpose? And then, again, look for new ideas. Because there's always ways that data use can be easier and faster, and it's changing, of course, and particularly as you expand different types of users. So there's never going to be a one size fits all. So look at different ways to do that and be open to it. One I wanted to mention was like data marketplaces and exchanges. That's becoming kind of an interesting way to do it. So you could even set up an internal data marketplace where you have, say, data sets or predictive models, things like that. It might be there that are vetted. It's not, you're going to have some people behind it to help users work with it. But I think that's often a good way to do it, just sort of setting it out there, using that kind of model of a marketplace or an exchange to make it available and easier for users to just kind of pick up and add to their work.
Amazing. Yeah. And I know we're going to be having a podcast covering your BPR, your best practice report that's going to be authored here relatively shortly, in a month or two or a couple months. I know you're working hard on it. So I'm excited to, delve into that deeper with you on that episode when we go through it.
Yeah, that'd be
But
cool. That'll be great.
yeah. But I do appreciate you stopping by. Of course, it's always good to talk with you today. And I think our conversation here on data democratization was pretty enlightening. So I will let you go at this point, Dave. As I mentioned, thanks again for your time. And we'll see you again soon. Okay.
Thank you, Andrew, and happy Independence Day.
Yeah, that's right. Happy Independence Day, everyone.
Yeah.